Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, the sanctimoniously notorious RMB, coming at you for this Robservations number 182. Robservations, of course, being the show about something. I've got Gilbert and Tallulah in the background. Hi, how you doing, Gilly? Say hello to the folks at home. Yeah, I already gave them cookies, so they don't get cookies. I know I said cookies. I'm sorry, I said cookies. I shouldn't say that. But anyway, it's number 182. Unbelievable. Can't believe it. It's 182, but it is. Thanks to all of you. Thanks to all of you, imagination connoisseurs and members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community, the most hospitable community on the internet. But I have some words to say about this, people, that are going to be directed toward you. Anyway, I also want to say that, as you all know, these chats are brought to you by Lucky Tiger Men's Grooming Products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And if you go to their website at getluckytiger.com, you can punch in Post-Geek Singularity or PGS. Just punch in PGS when you check out and you get 20% off your order. I am running out. I actually had my Lucky Tiger body wash that I love pilfered. Zoe Trope pilfered it from our shower and took it away. And when I went to use it today, it was gone. Unbelievable. So Lucky Tiger products are not just for men who want to look good and feel great. They are for everyone. So I would, that all over body washes is delightful. I love the way it smells, as an aside. Anyway, I've been gone for 2 days. I apologize. It was Elizabeth's birthday on Saturday. And to be honest, I didn't stream yesterday because I was working on a video, but also my head hurt. I might have been a little hungover, maybe. I don't know. Could have been. But fine birthday. We went on a little pub crawl in downtown LA. I will say this. I used to go to the Intercontinental when it first opened, and the Intercontinental Hotel has a bar, an outside bar on the 73rd floor. And it's the highest bar in the Western Hemisphere, I believe. New York might have a bar that's topped that, but I'm not sure. It did. Used to be a great place. Now they've turned it into a club. You have to pay like a cover charge. They play their music too loud, which got me off on a Twitter rant where I talked about all great bars. You can always tell. Like, I think a great bar is one of the most important things in life. Having a good place to go meet friends, a good place to unwind, a good place to have a fine drink, whether it's just a beautiful lager on tap or fine spirits, single malt scotch, whatever you're interested in. A good bar is one of life's great pleasures. And part of a good bar is that the management understands how loud they can play the music and the beats per minute of that music, the BPM. And I do not like going to bars when the BPM is too fast. You should be able to judge your patrons to understand this. Good bartenders and good managers of bars know what to do. And I don't like it when the music is too loud and the BPMs are too fast. You're either in a bar or you're in a club. Never the two shall meet. While they do serve alcohol at clubs, obviously, they're not bars. And Tallulah has figured out how to open the kitchen trash can. She can step on the thing and get her head in. It pops open. And she's always going into the garbage. It's just not good. I guess she's going through the terrible eights. But anyway, was very disappointed that the Intercontinental has basically turned from this really cool outdoor bar to basically a nightclub in the afternoon, which bothered me. That's all right. I understand. They're making money. Everyone's got to get paid, don't they? But anyway, someone wrote to me over the weekend. Actually, I heard from two people over the weekend about my chats, these chats, and you people specifically, you people in these live chats, who I adore. But I just want to remind everyone, if somebody has a point of view, or I read a letter that is not necessarily, you might take umbrage, you might not enjoy what that person is saying, I would please implore all of you, all of my wonderful audience that is watching these chats, I'm reading something for a reason. I'm usually reading letters for a reason. And what I'm hoping to do is start some cogent discourse and not necessarily attack the letter writer. That's not what I'm looking to do. I'm looking to have, because I know you guys, you're all imagination connoisseurs out there. And what I want to do is spark interesting conversation, because what goes on in the live chats spills out into the letters that I get. And I want everybody, even if somebody might have an opinion that not a lot of you share, I would hope that we treat everybody here equally in terms of to consider their opinion and at least discuss their opinion because it's my fault if you guys get mad at somebody, so don't blame them. It's me who chose to read the letter. So I just want to be clear on that point, that if I bring up somebody's letter to read, please consider it and consider what they have to say, because the whole point of this place is to consider all points of view and hopefully discuss them. I just want to say that off the bat because I had I was contacted by two different people about this, and they were disappointed. And I don't want to disappoint anybody. I want to be able to have anybody come here and talk and feel welcome. And that's what we're all supposed to be doing with one another. Right, Gilbert? Yeah, Gilbert thinks so too. Anyway, what I really wanted to talk about off the top, now I don't know. First of all, I'm going to read you a few things to catch you up. First of all, I watched The Great Hack, which is on Netflix. It's a new documentary from Karine Amer and Jihan Nujim. I don't think I pronounced those names correctly, but The Great Hack is all about Cambridge Analytica and their involvement in the Brexit campaign and Donald Trump's campaign. Fascinating documentary. It's really incredible, and it's basically on a larger scale. It's all about what big data is doing to our lives, and it was very interesting. One of the things, and they just touched upon this in a small way, but I found it one of the more interesting elements of the entire documentary. And they were talking about how Cambridge Analytica was involved in the elections for the new prime minister between Trinidad and Tobago. And what they were doing was, Trinidad and Tobago you have a lot of East Indians and a lot of black citizens of these countries. And what they did was, knowing the difference in the cultures of East Indian culture and the Black Island culture, they were able to use data sets and data points to literally prey on one group, which they knew that the East Indian population, strong family ties, and children will do what their parents tell them to do. And the black contingent has a little bit more of a rebellious attitude. So what they were able to do is basically engineer a campaign of not voting, and they put out into the world, "Don't vote," and they were able to prey on. It wasn't a race issue; it was a social issue. How people are socialized. It's literally a cultural issue, and they basically were able to get more East Indians to turn out at the polls. They only need to create a 6% difference, and the East Indian candidate won the election. And I found that fascinating. But The Great Hack is a incredible documentary of what happened with Cambridge Analytica and what's still going on, not with Cambridge Analytica because it's gone now, but everything they created, their data points and all of that. It's a fascinating documentary. And it's whatever side of the aisle you're on, it's not necessarily, big data is not a partisan issue. It's an issue for all of us to be very aware of. And it's a tremendous documentary, and I cannot recommend it enough. But that led into something that I was very interested in also that happened last week, which is the International Conference on Cybersecurity took place on July 25th. Now I'm going to read you a little bit about that conference. It was at Fordham University. The FBI is working to address evolving cyber threats facing the country, including foreign influence and foreign investment, FBI Director Christopher Wray said at a cybersecurity conference. That was on the 25th. These threats strike, and they strike hard at our security. That means our economic security and our ability to keep our companies safe from theft and intrusion, Wray said. It means our national security. It means our safety as everyday citizens walking the streets and sending our kids to school. Wray served as a closing speaker at the International Conference on Cybersecurity in New York, co-sponsored by the FBI and Fordham University. He was joined by Reverend Joseph McShane, president of Fordham University, and FBI New York Special Agent in Charge Aristides Maharius. Ray described the many resources the FBI brings to its cyber mission, from cyber action teams to 24-hour command post known as Cywatch, to the addition of cyber-focused legal attachés in the FBI offices around the world. Our role isn't limited to investigations, Ray explained. We're using our expertise to warn the public and private sectors about what we're seeing and to spotlight risks and vulnerabilities. Foreign influence is one of today's most pressing cyber-related threats, and Ray discussed the FBI's role in mitigating these threats to the 2020 elections. Through its Foreign Influence Task Force, the FBI has foreign influence-related investigations open across the country. The Bureau's efforts also involve building relationships with the private sector and information sharing. But the foreign influence threat isn't just limited to election season, Ray said. We have to remain vigilant all year round. We have to raise public awareness and increase our country's resilience in more sustained and enduring ways. So that happened. Now, one of the things that came out of this conference as a result of what they were discussing, and this is another article I'm going to read that was on NBC News. U.S. Cybersecurity Agency uses pineapple pizza to demonstrate vulnerability to foreign influence. Within 24 hours of the first tweet, the fake war on pineapple had begun to have its intended effect. This article is by Jacob Ward on NBC News. What does pineapple pizza have to do with interference by Russia and other trolls in U.S. elections? Everything, the head of an American cybersecurity agency says, because foreign governments trying to create divisiveness want Americans to argue and will go after low-hanging fruit like pizza toppings. From a little-known conference put on by Fordham University and the FBI this week, the Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity, and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, Director Christopher Krebs tweeted his own hot take on pineapple pizza. Thumbs down. Christopher Krebs actually tweeted on his verified Twitter, definitely without pineapple on pizza is disgusting. waronpineapple.com, hashtag waronpineapple. The tweet was accompanied by a tongue-in-cheek poster describing the tactics by which foreign trolls divide voters and inject chaos into an election. Their topic wasn't race or politics or any other traditionally divisive issue. It was whether tropical fruit belongs on your dinner order. The CISA breaks down the playbook of foreign influencers into 5 steps: targeting divisive issues, see pineapple pizza; moving accounts into place; amplifying and distorting the conversation; making the mainstream, see NBC News story about pineapple pizza; and taking the conversation into the real world. Krebs said his agency is trying to strengthen the national immune system for disinformation. How do you take the tactics, techniques, and procedures of the bad guys and educate the American people? How do you explain this is how you're being manipulated? This is how they're hacking into your brain. And that's why Krebs' team considers itself lucky that a few months ago over lunch, members of the CISA's election security team began to butt heads over their food preferences. First, there was a bunch arguing about salt and vinegar potato chips, said Jeff Hale, who leads the group. But that was nothing compared to the argument that broke out over pineapple on pizza. The issue evenly split the diners and lasted well beyond the meal. That's when Hale and his team realized this was a perfect parallel to what the CISA knew was such a vulnerability in American minds. It reminded us of these genuine, heartfelt opinions that can be exploited to fan the flames, he said. It's hard to explain to people that their heartfelt opinions are being used to unconsciously exploit them. Within 24 hours of the first tweet, the war on pineapple had begun to have its intended effect. It went viral among not just everyday citizens, but secretaries of state who oversee elections. Some got the joke, some didn't. Vermont's Secretary of State tweeted that the hashtag war on pineapple shows, quote, how foreign bad actors sow chaos. The National Association of State Election Directors tweeted, "Pineapple on pizza? No way." Its president tweeted, "No pineapple ever belongs on a pizza." The National Association of Secretaries of State, one of the nation's most important bodies for overseeing election security, replied with an image of a sign about pineapple belonging on pizza and the message, "We're just going to leave this here." Soon it was a meme. Director Ron Wyden tweeted that, "My opinion on pineapple pizza is Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump need to stop obstructing election security legislation." Disagreements about pizza toppings are analogous in how they spread and become distorted to all sorts of political and social topics, according to Krebs. In the lead up to 2020, there are going to be all sorts of issues foreign actors will use. In an analysis of Russia's interference tactics during the 2016 presidential campaign, officials found that trolls went after wedge issues like race, gender, and sexuality, but they weren't out to persuade and win any arguments. They just want us to doubt ourselves as people. They're not trying to win anything. They're just trying to make other people lose. Academics who study disinformation say that the pineapple debate is instructive because it's a passionate topic that's disconnected from political opinions. The rest of our identities are becoming increasingly aligned with our political identities, said Kevin Munger, assistant professor of political science and social data analytics at Penn State University. So if you say you go to church, you're more likely to also hold a certain political position on many issues. What's useful about the pineapple thing is that it's cross-cutting, it's random. The fact that it transcends political lines make it more powerful in terms of expanding its reach. Issues like race or gender or sexual orientation may, like pineapple pizza, make the United States uniquely vulnerable to these attacks. Russian ads were not some uniquely creative attempt to persuade Americans on issues that hadn't occurred to American political consultants, said Nate Persily, director of the Stanford Cyber Policy Center, which studies the internet's effects on democracy. They were just echoing what was going on domestically. And this article goes on. The point being, having just watched The Great Hack and watching just how our elections were meddled with. And it's not just our elections. How Cambridge Analytica was actually talking about, even if there was no foreign actors involved, Cambridge Analytica was hired by the Republican Party. They were hired by the Republicans using their 5,000 data points, and they were specifically targeting, they were micro-targeting our voting, the body of all the voters out there, Republican voters in specifically various counties, to tip the Electoral College in favor of Donald Trump. They were hired to do this. Now, here's the thing. Not illegal. I give it up. I give it up for Cambridge Analytica, and I give it up for the Republicans of having such foresight. Not a crime. It's not a crime to use information that we, all of us, have presented to the world. As a matter of fact, we can't stop giving our information. I'm sure whatever I'm saying on this live chat is being, and who's here, I don't know. It's all being cataloged and used. Cambridge Analytica just did it better and more extensively than anyone else. And their services were for sale. As a matter of fact, you can go watch, it's Alexander Nix, I believe, who is the head of Cambridge Analytica. He would give TED Talks about all of this information. And no one I mean, somebody did, they did. They've used it to influence elections and also the Brexit vote. And it's actually pretty brilliant. And so the Russians were just doing the same thing. And yes, the American people we were being experimented on. But it's not a crime. Not yet, anyway. But anyway, what does this have to do with genre? Fiction, science fiction, fantasy, and horror. What does it have to do with all of us? Well, has there been a more divisive issue amongst fans than The Last Jedi? Now, it might seem strange. A lot of people were saying to me when I was talking about this on Twitter yesterday, like, oh, come on. It was Rian Johnson himself who was bringing up Russian trolls, and that's not true. Look, of course it's true. Of course it's true that just like with pineapple pizza, they proved how a stupid, just inconsequential issue like pineapple on pizza. I personally do not like Hawaiian pizza. Not a fan. My favorite kinds of pizza are hearty meat pizzas. I'm going to give a shout out to the Pasadena Pizza Company that is half a block from my house. Their Meat Lovers pizza is one of my favorite pizzas of all time. I don't like pineapple on my pizza, but I would have weighed in and I would have talked to all my followers on this inconsequential issue. But the thing is, there's as many people that love pineapple on their pizza as people who don't. Now, suddenly, we're now arguing about pineapple pizza, and we're using the knowledge of what people think about pineapple pizza as to whether or not we can like them anymore. You know, we get in these, I mean, it's a fun debate about pineapple pizza, but their point is at this conference at Fordham University, they just wanted to prove that what even Taylor Swift, she weighed in on something like this. This happens all the time. Now, with Last Jedi, it never burned itself out. It's still going even today. Release the Snyder Cut. All of these things, whether they're started as memes, it shows how we take an opinion and then turn someone's opinion about whether they like a movie or whether they like pepperoni pizza or they want pineapple on their pizza. And we turn these issues into indicators of whether or not we can even like a person. You know, it goes from being a simple, we forget, we go from having a simple, fun debate over an innocuous issue like pineapple on pizza, and then it turns into something where we're starting to judge one another based on our opinions of something that really we shouldn't be judging each other on. I mean, you know, it's like in elementary school when you do that, you learn about genes and how, you know, you can roll your tongue like that and some people can't. We didn't judge people based on those things. And now we're judging people over these simple ideas. And I've seen our fan community had Last Jedi, then we had Captain Marvel as two. I've never seen such acrimony fly back and forth online, and it got very ugly, and it still gets ugly. The notions of all of these things. We're talking about movies, and then it became personal. We're no longer talking about Captain Marvel. We're talking about Brie Larson herself, and then we're delving into her politics, and it just goes from there. And suddenly, I've been taken to task because I've said I liked Captain Marvel. I said it felt like an indie movie, more so than any other MCU film, which is probably what they were going for because the directors had made movies like Half Nelson before they made Captain Marvel. But The Last Jedi is a perfect example. I mean, not only does The Last Jedi become divisive amongst the fan community, then suddenly people are making disparaging remarks about Rian Johnson as a person. They're talking about Disney's stewardship over the franchise. This one issue, whether or not you liked Last Jedi, suddenly became like, no one did that over the prequels. I know they weren't owned by Disney then, but a lot of people, I guess, because people understand that at least people from my around within a decade of me, people feel kind of the same way about the prequels. They didn't like them, but there wasn't the kind of vicious acrimony toward other fans. It was all mostly directed towards George Lucas himself. But it's just watching The Great Hack, hearing about this conference at Fordham University on July 25th, and then reading about their experiment they unleashed about pineapple pizza, it really gave me pause. And it really made me understand that, like, if I said one wrong thing on one of these chats, and when I say wrong, I might say something that offends somebody, or a slip of the tongue could get me into a lot of trouble. And then suddenly I'm pilloried on the internet and Robservations is over. We live in a strange world that literally within a 24-hour period, you can influence culture. You can influence society. And the fan community, one of the things that I really wanted to do when I started this channel was I just wanted to have fun talking about genre issues. What's it like to be a genre fan? I just wanted to share because I love so much stuff. And I'm like, hey, I'll just do a show. That's what John Schnepp used to tell me. He's like, you're so enthusiastic and excited about this stuff. You should do a show. And one of the things that I wasn't aware that was happening was the fact that this, I guess, my boundless exuberance and positivity about all this stuff was something that people were attracted to. And I want to continue that. I want to be able to touch on these issues, whether they're issues of culture or politics, but I want to do it in such a way like this, where we can talk about issues of the day, cybersecurity, information, You'll find out in the great hack that big data has now surpassed oil as the great industry on the planet Earth, because data tells us a lot about so many different things. And why should we be concerned about all this? Well, I'll just give you one example: healthcare. If you have a genetic test, if you go to 23andMe and find out about your genetic history, what's to stop 23andMe from sharing all your genetic data with an insurance company, even if you opt out on the fact that you don't want to know what you're predisposed to die from? You think 23andMe is going to keep that information? I'm sure somebody is out there is interested. And what if you can't get healthcare in your 20s or 30s because the insurance company knows that when you're 65 or in your 60s, you're predisposed to a certain genetic condition? What happens if that kind of data becomes, and by the way, it's already out there. That's already happening. But we live in a sci-fi world. The problem is our sci-fi world is not being looked at by people who have a great understanding of science fiction. When you can't even get a great Star Trek TV show that's written by people who understand science fiction, don't think that the ethics and morality of our sci-fi world are being considered, because they're not. Cambridge Analytica pioneered this kind of data mining, and they sold it. They made a lot of money, but it's not a genie you're ever going to put back in a bottle. All of that information is out there. Just like we still have to quantify. There's a lot of things that's going to happen in the future when we can get into when we can design babies. Tallulah, please. When we can design babies. And by the way, that technology is here too. It's just not as well known. And certainly it's not regulated, but will it be? Will we be able to address the moral and ethical and ramifications of all of these new technologies? We certainly didn't do that with Cambridge Analytica. Where's the regulation? There's none of it. And like this article points out, there's no such thing as election meddling now. It's meddling all the time. And whether it's from foreign bad actors or not, or domestic commercial concerns, we are being manipulated 24/7 all the time. And when it comes to an issue like The Last Jedi, how much easier is it to foment dissent amongst the population than by making it seem like it's over an innocuous issue like Last Jedi? But once you start talking about Last Jedi, look where it spills out to. Is Rey a Mary Sue? Then it becomes an issue of men versus women, then white male privilege. And then it just spins out of control. And all you have to do is start talking about The Last Jedi. All you have to do. I hated Last Jedi. Rian Johnson sucks. I hate Disney Star Wars. And you're off to the races. I make one tweet about Last Jedi. If I make it pointed enough, it can stay in my feed for days, if not weeks, as people bounce back and forth, telling me all about whether they hated Last Jedi or whether they like Last Jedi. But then it always spills out into much larger political issues. And then we get to the point where, look, depending on what I tweet, people can hate my guts. I got into it on Twitter last year when I talked about Hollywood movies being a meritocracy. And I was saying that, isn't it interesting that we have more people of color and more women and more previously marginalized voices directing tentpole movies than ever before? And I was trying to make the point that, hey, isn't that cool? Isn't that a good thing that we're getting more? And I made the point, I'm like, look, Ryan Coogler did not just get the job directing Black Panther because he was black. I said Ryan Coogler made a great indie movie in Fruitville Station, but I've often talked on this show how I thought Creed, the film Creed, was a great jolt to an old franchise. And he made a surprisingly emotional, heartfelt, and yet kick-ass movie that took the Rocky franchise to a place it had never been before, honoring the franchise's entire history, honoring Sylvester Stallone, and then giving us a brand new character in Adonis Creed that we could all get behind. Man, did I get jumped on from people I thought were all part of my side of the aisle. I would call us the progressive left. People came after me, and then they started talking about, well, yes, but it's still a privileged environment, and how many people are even able to get on sets? And I'm like, look, that is all true, but that wasn't my point. My point was that when you're at the tentpole level and you're directing a movie that they're spending $150 million plus on, the fact that we now have female directors like Patty Jenkins doing Wonder Woman, or whether it's F. Gary Gray doing Fast and the Furious or The Fate of the Furious, which is Fast and Furious 8, whether you have Coogler doing Black Panther, we're making progress, and all kinds of voices. Now we've got Shang-Chi getting made. There's all kinds of different people making inroads into culture. And as I've always said, that just the more diversity. And when I say diversity, it's not just about gender or color. It's about points of view, ultimately. People who have different points of view and different cultural experiences. We're only going to get better stories in the long run, the more people that we involve in all of this. And I've always believed that. And yes, we're going through an evolutionary period of time where, middle-aged cis white males like myself, I'm going to have a harder time of it. But I'm not going to get angry because our culture is changing and we're evolving, and that's what's happening. But it's really interesting to see how easily we are manipulated. And I'm not some tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorist, because to me, unfortunately, all conspiracies, it all just comes down to money. In our finite lives, we're basically, from the time we're like 20 to maybe 70, what do we got? We got 50 years where you want to live high on the hog, be rich, be able to date who you want to date, travel around the world, live in the lap of luxury. At the end of the day, I don't think it's as much about power. I mean, it could be if that's all you're doing is hanging out in Washington, but really anybody, they just want money. At the end of the day, that's what every conspiracy is all about, money. Even more so than, we're going to start, whether it's neo-Nazi fascists, like in Sum of All Fears, the movie, not necessarily the book, they want to put us at war with the Soviet Union so the Aryan nation can rise again. Even that eventually will give way to people they just want to make good money, stay in great hotels, sleep with whomever they want, and go to great ski vacations and ride on yachts. I mean, it's just, at the end of the day, it's just about money. And that's kind of sad, really. I mean, wouldn't it be great if we had a conspiracy theorist or not a real conspiracy, not a theorist, but a real cabal of people that say wanted to stop global warming? Give me that kind of a conspiracy, but there's no money in it. How do you, the reason why nobody's really that concerned about global warming right now is because there's no money in solving global warming. And eventually it'll be too late, but that's okay. Wouldn't it be great, though, if we did? And there's a reason why there's no global conspiracy to stop global warming, because there's no money in it, and who cares? The people that are alive, those people that are in positions of power to start some kind of a conspiracy like that, they're too rich. They're enjoying their money too much. They're not going to stop, they're not going to get rid of their fossil fuels anytime soon. But I just thought it was all very interesting. This whole idea of the great hack, and then this conference at Fordham, and the fact that they used the pineapple pizza, the Hawaiian pizza analogy on Twitter, and started a culture war based on pineapple pizza. And that's what's been going on in fan communities. I mean, all the way back, the rabbit and the sad puppies with the Hugo Awards, you had Gamergate, all of these things that have happened in the fan community, the fandom menace now. And what I want, how does this all relate back to Robservations? I want all of you people that are on these live chats, I just want everybody to remember, we're here to discuss ideas. If you hear someone who has an idea that you don't like, rather than, say, screw that guy or screw that girl, offer a differing opinion that sort of counters what they've said, but hopefully in a learned, cogent manner that can invite more discourse. I don't want people that are writing me letters or that are in the live chats to leave because they feel that they're not being heard. And all of this kind of comes back to that. And you know what? That's not to say if someone's going to be a real douchebag in the live chats. That's why my moderators, Terry, Greg, Mike, and Detective Jim, that's why they're there. And I know, by the way, I know that Mike, and I've never actually met Detective Jim or Terry, but I have a feeling that even amongst my four moderators, there are differing points of view, which I like. I think that's a good thing. So it's all very interesting. And the real question is, how are we all going to move forward and not allow, it's so easy. it's so easy to trigger everybody. But how do we make sure that pineapple pizza doesn't become the wedge issue that destroys our democracies? I know it seems strange, but whether it's The Last Jedi, whether it's Captain Marvel, whatever it is, it's so easy to create a firestorm of controversy on Twitter without having to resort to political issues. Because ultimately, as I've said, everything is politics in some way, shape, or form. Even your opinion about, hey, Tallulah, even your opinion about pineapple pizza. Factual Opinion says, the Next Generation Season 3 uniform looks refreshingly better. Well, for those who wonder what Factual Opinion means and how did I jump to this non sequitur, Factual Opinion is correct. In the third season of Next Generation, they got rid of they completely redesigned what the Next Generation cast would call their spacesuits. We would call their uniforms. Redesigned the uniforms, gave them a high collar, got rid of the zippers in front, and just made them all around better. There were two pieces instead of one piece, and much, much, much better. And you are correct. Wade O'Neill says, when I think of bad actors, I think Eric Freeman from Silent Night, Deadly Night 2. That said, here's what makes the film awesome. Bad actors, bad actors, when it's used in a political context. My friend Mike Schertz, he of Crisis Medicine, crisis-medicine.com. I did, of course, a 50-hour medical lecture series, sort of a masterclass, starring my good friend Mike Schertz, 18 Delta. He's an MD. He calls bad actors the enemy. Instead of saying the enemy, he says bad actors, meaning there were bad actors at the Gilroy Garlic Festival this weekend, which, I mean, again, I can see you can draw lines from people using the pineapple issue to foment dissent, and eventually they spill out. And how long does it take for people to have a differing opinion about pineapple on pizza than to work their way all the way down to crazy fringe political websites and people getting inflamed and incited? So bad actors, I mean bad actors as villains, as evildoers, that as bad actors. Wade O'Neill also says, are you familiar with AMC Shudder, a horror streaming service, also with original content, peppered with ads about it? No, if it's any good. Shudder is great. Shudder is doing so much for horror. They've got original series on. They're showing all kinds of things. Give it up for Shudder. Big fan. Big fan. Don't know what to put says pineapple pizza isn't just for breakfast anymore. It is not. I don't know if it ever was. Emmanuel Ericart says pineapple on pizza is the Jar Jar of pizzas. Well, I have to say, in the defense of a Hawaiian pizza, that's what I consider pineapple and ham. There is something about the tart, fruity taste of pineapple combined in your mouth with good ham on pizza. I'm not a big fan of it, but there is something to be said for that unique taste combination. So I'm not going to come out and say I personally don't like pineapple on pizza because I'm very much a meat pizza guy. I'm not keen on much vegetable matter on pizza, to be honest. But I understand that there are a lot of people who are, and that I don't want to take away from people who enjoy pineapple on their pizza. The real question is, if I find somebody who does something so different that's different from what I like, is there a way that I can have common ground with somebody who likes pineapple on their pizza? Is there a pizza that we can both agree on? I think that's the question. If the question arises, okay, do we go for the margarita pizza? If you don't want what I want on my toppings and I don't want what you want, can then we find, say, a margarita pizza that we can all agree on or not? Is pineapple the deal breaker? Is that worth walking away from a friendship from? I don't know. That's the real question. I think in my mind, it's more important to discuss, why do you love pineapple pizza? What is it about pineapple on pizza that really floats your boat? That's what's worth doing, finding out why people like these things. You never know. Don't know what to put says, Rob, I'm about to get a cut at Tommy Gunn's barbershop. No Lucky Tiger products there. What's up with that? Call your buddy a Lucky Tiger. Well, I'll tell you what is there. there is, in fact, Lucky Tiger is an offshoot of a company that makes Barbicide. Barbicide is that blue liquid that's in every. It's where they put their brushes and combs and things like that. You've seen it in every barbershop, every salon. Barbicide is everywhere. The people that make Lucky Tiger, their parent company, I think it's their parent company, makes Barbicide. So that's pretty cool. And yes, every one of you should go to Lucky Tiger before the end of the month and punch in your Post-Geek Singularity code PGS and buy some of their products because I want to push that. I'm going to drop another Living the Lucky Tiger Life. I interviewed James Hills again. I interviewed him in Vancouver on a new Norwegian cruise line. Now he was at some crazy boutique hotel in Florida. So I talked to him about that, which is kind of neat. And I'm going to drop that video today. But yes, Barbicide. So I bet they have it at that barbershop. Tommy Gunn, like the real Tommy Gunn, like Tommy Gunn from Rocky 5. That's pretty cool. Willow Yang says, glad to see that the website's back up and running again. I've been trying to send you letters telepathically. I guess you haven't received them. Willow, I have not received your telepathic letters, even though I think you and I are on the same wavelength about most things. For those who want to know, indeed, my website was knocked offline based on it's called a brute force attack. Somebody specifically targeted my website. It was knocked offline for a number of days. A lot of people have sent me some cash, which was very nice, and I really appreciate the support. We did put $100 of extra security on the website, which maybe we should have done from the beginning. But you don't really. I didn't think that I would be the victim of that kind of a cyber attack, but it was unfortunate because what are we trying to do but foster communication? And the idea of somebody trying to interrupt that communication, which they did for a number of days, was annoying, especially because people are joining at the website, and we keep expanding the website, and it's really a way for everybody to interact. And so when some kid comes in or some adult and wrecks it all for all of us, it was a bummer. But I appreciate those people who've supported and threw in some extra ducats. We did use them, and I really appreciate the fact that people cared, because I love getting letters from everybody, and it was a bummer not to get letters for a couple of days. And yeah. Suthius says, hey, Mr. B, we say that music is the universal language. Really, I think English is. Just look at airports and amusement park in other countries. You will find English. Same with stores and restaurants. Well, I don't know. I mean, I know people speak English all around the world. I've been an English speaker my whole life, and I have a hard time. I read so much stuff. I was always frustrated trying to learn foreign languages, and I couldn't read. One of the great regrets in my life is that when I was growing up as a kid, I wish that I was learning multiple languages at the same time. Like when I started in kindergarten and first grade, I wish that I was being taught English, Spanish, and say Mandarin or Cantonese or something. I would love to have learned to speak French, just because French, I think, is a great sounding language. It would have been nice to be somebody who's more versed. I would love to speak Japanese, for instance, because then I could read the instructions of half the models and toys I buy. But yes, I don't know. I don't know about English being. I guess it is. I mean, I think that English is a universal business language. But remember, it depends where we go as a species. I mean, look at Firefly. The future in Firefly was very Chinese based. That China pretty much became the dominant force on Earth into the future. So there was a lot of Chinese iconography and language, which I thought was always kind of cool. Emmanuel Ericart says, hate is the new currency of the internet. Yeah, it's funny. I didn't grow up in a world where I felt hatred for people. And I think it's interesting that you don't have to look any further. The fact that you can say that proves that there are forces out there that are manipulating us based on the data mining you will see in the Great Hack with the Cambridge Analytica stuff. I mean, once you watch this documentary, whether you want to believe that it's one-sided or look, of course, documentary, the filmmakers are showing you they're skewing to a belief system and they want the audience to sort of buy into what they're saying. But the Cambridge Analytica documentary seemed to me pretty fair-minded. It was basically just presenting something. It didn't come out and say, like, when I watched it, I was like, I admired what I was seeing in The Great Hack. I'm like, you know what? Give it up for these people. They willingly took information that we were going to give to them. I mean, they even started Facebook polls. And who doesn't want to answer a poll? So, and they mined all of that data. And I just couldn't help but think how clever that was. You know, it's not, and Facebook was complicit. They knew. I mean, they might not have known what all this data was being used for, but it's like nobody cared enough because it wasn't enough of a problem. And when you look at the documentary, you'll see how far back Cambridge Analytica goes. And I got to hand it to them because, you know what? They were smart. They were very, very smart. And the fact that we didn't prevent it, or that, let's just say, what was really interesting is that they clearly were one-sided because the Republican Party was smart to use what Cambridge Analytica had to offer, all of this data mining, and the fact that Cambridge Analytica did target voters to get a certain outcome on our election. Not illegal. They were just smart. And when people are smart like that, you need to be smarter. And I don't know if we are. You know, we're still arguing over the same stuff, just like we're, I'm sure, going to be arguing over, look, we're going into 2020 with a Star Wars movie. Now, you might think this is weird, but if people don't like Last Jedi, I mean, people don't like, Gilbert, stop barking. If people don't like Rise of Skywalker, what you're going to do is you're going to see a bunch of people trying to incite fans and people on the internet to talk about their hatred of Last Jedi, which will very easily spill over into political issues like whether or not you're a Mary Sue or a character is a Mary Sue. It's going to happen. And it's not out of the realm of any kind of possibility. Gilbert, why are you barking? Gilbert just wants my attention, I think. So watch, it's going to happen. It's going to happen, and we will all be witnesses. But again, I can't recommend more watching The Great Hack. It's a compelling. You know what I really loved about The Great Hack, which I thought was really great, and I got to hand it to the effects team. The way they display, like, how do you show data? How we're giving data away all the time. Well, the way they do it in the film, the way they visually depict data coming from all of us and where it all is going, really brilliantly done. A brilliant conception, a beautiful design, and it's really great. And I got to hand it to them because it really makes you understand how much data is going off from all of us all the time. Suthius says pineapple, ham, chicken, and jalapenos is good. Well, that actually does sound good. I don't know if it's good on pizza, but all right. Racanman85 says, Rob, did you check out all the new Hot Toys revealed and they're up for pre-order? My John Wick arrives this week. Yes, you know, there are so many. I've pre-ordered so many Hot Toys, and some of them, like the rescue armor, Pepper Potts' rescue armor, doesn't even drop until 2021. Hot Toys is killing it. They are killing it with their pre-orders and the stuff. They've got a quarter scale, not even 6 scale, quarter scale figure coming out. It's killing. They're killing it. I just, the amount of money it requires to keep up with all this is a lot. But they're so great. And as you can see, one day I'm going to have these cabinets lit up so you can see my Hot Toys collection. But yes, John Wick is shipping. Actually, I believe John Wick, if you bought from Sideshow, you would have got it last week. But yeah, I have a lot of figures on pre-order, but I pre-order from Sideshow, which requires a deposit. And even with the figures that have deposited, you're still looking at hundreds of dollars, depending on how much you want to pre-order. But man, there's a lot of great stuff coming out. JB Bonifacio has something, a great example. Which film will beget more toxicity? Joker or Rise of Skywalker? Well, That's a really good question. I think I think the fan outrage sweepstakes are going to be neck and neck with both Joker and Rise of Skywalker. Although here's what I don't understand amongst fans, my peeps. What I don't understand, why there would be any toxicity about Joker, because Joker is a one-off. It's an Elseworlds tale. It's a really interesting idea, an examination into the Joker is a human being. He was born, brought into this world by a mother, presumably had a father. We know nothing. How was a man like the Joker created? As John Campea is fond of saying, one bad day, which came, of course, out of a comic book. One bad day create the Joker? We saw that one bad day created Indiana Jones, according to The Last Crusade. But it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see where we go with the Joker. But I would wait and see. If the Joker is a great film, and the fact that it's in competition at the Venice Film Festival, that's pretty amazing. The fact that Joker is I don't know if any superhero or comic book related it has ever been at a film festival like that. I mean, I don't know. I think that's a really good question. I'm not really sure. By the way, I've got letters to read, and I haven't read them, and I'm going to read a letter because I'm back on the letter tip. This one is interesting. This one comes from Kyle Arking. Dear RMB and Gilbert. What about Tallulah, dude? You often talk about how you would have loved to grow up with all of these comic book, TV shows, and films when you were a kid. Well, let me tell you what it's like being a kid during the reign of the MCU. I like to call myself the first fan of the MCU. I know it's probably not true, but when I was 9 years old and had no friends who were comic book fans, I felt like the only fan on the face of the earth. My mom used to watch Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four with me all the time, but the one thing that my mom loved getting me to do was reading. I would read many comics and books about movies. Then in April of 2008, I made my way into Barnes & Noble and discovered the junior movie novelization of Iron Man 1. I read the whole thing in one day and was just astonished at how well written the story was. I became an Iron Man fan and an MCU fan all in one day. I felt so privileged that I knew the entire story before anyone else. On opening night, my dad and I were almost late to the theater, so I tried to remember what happened at the beginning of the book in case I missed it. Tony and Rhodey at a casino. Tony and Rhodey at a casino, I kept saying to myself. I loved every second of it, but still regret not staying after the credits. How was I supposed to know there was a scene at the end? Through the MCU, I've been able to meet so many friends. I remember trying to talk to a girl I liked when we were in the 5th grade by showing her a clip of Iron Man 2 before it came out. She didn't watch it, but I tried. Funny enough, that same girl ended up seeing Age of Ultron with me in high school, and we've been great friends and seeing many MCU films since. Let me just stop you right there and editorialize. At 5th grade, trying to meet the ladies by showing them a clip from Iron Man 2, you, my friend, you come from the same mold I'd like to think I came from. I like the fact that you were after the ladies in the 5th grade and doing so in a respectful manner. Good on you, sir. I met one of my best friends over a conversation about Arrow and the MCU. We've been theorizing ever since the Phase 3 reveal. One of my newest friends I made in college bonded with me over writing and texted me all of her reactions to the films prior to Endgame. Last year, my 99-year-old grandmother sat and watched a 17-film MCU marathon with me at our house. The MCU has now taken up more than half of my life, and I can't wait to see what relationships I'll make through Phase 4. But the MCU also means something more to me. I think of the summer of 2008 as the summer that turned me into an avid film fan. Not only was Iron Man 1 released that summer, but also The Incredible Hulk and The Dark Knight, which is my favorite film of all time, tied with Batman Begins. The summer of 2008 was also a rough summer for my family because it was the summer in which my mom had to undergo chemotherapy for her breast cancer. I was only 9, so I didn't have any real understanding of what was going on. I only knew that my mom was sick and had to go every couple of weeks. During this process, I would keep myself busy obsessing over the films that would be coming out and doing what she taught me, reading. I vividly remember reading the Incredible Hulk novelization while I was waiting for my mom. As the Hulk was fighting the Abomination, she was fighting a very ugly beast herself. She was unable to go with me to the movies that summer, but I really wished she could because I know how much those films cheered her up. After undergoing radiation in the fall, I couldn't wait to go home with her and show her Iron Man 1 on DVD. I'm so happy to say that my mom is now 11 years cancer-free. The first MCU film my mom saw in theaters was Thor. We had a blast, and Chris Hemsworth made quite an impression on her. I'll bet he did. The reason I wrote this letter is in response to the Phase 4 announcement at San Diego Comic-Con. I was beyond thrilled that Natalie Portman was returning as Jane Foster and the mighty Thor. Reading the comics, I discovered that Jane fought a similar cancer battle like my mom. With all of the friends I made through the MCU, I always found it cool when they would tell me how much they love having a character that relates to them. I have friends who finally have a hero in Black Panther, Captain Marvel, Shang-Chi, and Valkyrie. I think it's really cool that now my mom has a hero to look up to that's just like her. But the truth is, my mom is a hero. My mom is my hero. Thanks for reading my letter, Rob. I wish you the best, and I apologize for this letter being so long. Sincerely, Kyle A. Well, let me just tell you, if there's any letter I like to get the most, it's letters like this. Because not only do you have the account of somebody becoming a fan, which I always love to hear, it also shows how important fandom is to new generations of people. We tend to forget that every genre movie, every franchise film, it's going to be somebody's first time seeing one of these movies, and it's going to bring them into fandom. That's why whenever I talk about how much I cannot stand Star Trek Discovery, I also have to quickly remember that it's going to be fans. Well, Kyle didn't say anything about Star Trek, but somebody's going to watch Star Trek Discovery for the very first time, and it's going to lead them into the Star Trek universe. And I'm just going to look like just a monumental douche canoe if I'm sitting there slagging off on their favorite Star Trek show and their only Star Trek show. So I have to be mindful of that. But Kyle, this is a wonderful letter. I loved hearing about, having a 99-year-old grandmother that will watch 17 MCU films. Well, good on her. And apparently you come from great genetic stock. My mother suffered from breast cancer over the course of 3.5 years back in the 80s. She had 2 radical mastectomies. She had both of her breasts and her lymph nodes removed. So I've been there. My grandmother, her mother died of breast cancer when she was, I believe, 56. So I know exactly what it's like to have a parent to go through that. So it is tough. But what a wonderful letter you have written, and I especially love. You know what? I'm going to read this last paragraph, one of your last paragraphs, because I think this is important for everybody to remember. With all of the friends I made through the MCU, I always found it cool when they would tell me how they love having a character that relates to them. I have friends who finally have a hero in Black Panther, Captain Marvel, Shang-Chi, and Valkyrie. I think that's something we all as fans should remember. And I think it's important. And if there's any defining statement that I've read recently about what this site, what Robservations and what the Burnettwork is all about, that paragraph pretty much sums it all up. And while I don't always fulfill the destiny that I hope this site has, and I too can tend to be a toxic fan occasionally, I should do well to remember what you said, because you're absolutely right. And I thank you for your letter. What a great letter. Chris Canmore says, "Hi, Rob. I met you at Comic-Con when you walked on the exhibit floor. After fighting through your entourage and bribing your bodyguards, I finally got to say hi." You are 100% genuine and super cool. Well, Chris, thank you. I appreciate that. You know, I ran into somebody on last Thursday night when we were at seeing Once Upon a Time in Hollywood at the Cinerama Dome, and he wrote a very nice tweet about what it was like to meet me and talked about what an influence I was on his life, and I thought that was very nice. So it's always nice to hear when people have a good interaction with me. I'm usually 100% genuine and super cool. So I thank you for that. Thank you for noticing. And by the way, thanks for coming up and saying hello. Because that's why I go to events like that. You know, I want to share the love wherever I can. Rakanman85 says, I don't like the new Joker design. I think I will still like the movie, but how much of a character can you change and it still be that character? Well, okay, but that's a good question. But again, the question arises, which Joker are you talking about? In my mind, the thing about the Joker and the Joker movie is it's going for peak verisimilitude. It's trying to say, if the Joker exists in real life, if we're going to believe in that as a real person, what might have happened to that person to make the Joker the way he is? And I think it's really interesting that they're going in this direction. I mean, the Heath Ledger Joker was a little bit more, I would guess you would say, fantastical, only because he had slit, you know, his mouth was slit open and scarred or something. But I mean, he was a war paint Joker. This Joker sort of leans into the idea of being the crown prince of crime. But I do think that it will be the Joker. You're going to recognize the Joker, but it's going to be a more realistic portrayal than we've ever seen before. And I, for one, can't wait to see that, because I want to believe that the Joker could have existed in our world today. How does that happen? And I don't know. And I think the movie is going to answer that question for you. And I can't wait to see it. Now, the thing is, that's not going to take away. What I don't understand is, whatever your favorite portrayal of the Joker is, you know, if you liked, say, I don't know, the way Neil Adams drew the Joker, or you like the way that I don't know, Bob Kane, go all the way back that far, or you see how he was drawn or painted, or you go back to Alan Moore's Killing Joke, whatever Joker is your favorite, or Frank Miller in The Dark Knight Returns, whatever your favorite Joker is, they're all different aspects of that character. They focus on different things. I think this movie is going to do the same thing. And I can't wait to see it. It's going to be a Joker that you haven't seen before, but I think he's going to be familiar as well. This letter comes from my friend, my boy at Swack Props, Cal Kamal, and all the way across the pond. And for those of you who might not know, Swack Props and what Cal makes is he does prop books. And I was so delighted by the fact that he makes prop replicas of the book The Nine Gates from Roman Polanski's film The Ninth Gate, and he said he even sent me one. So we're waiting. It's apparently had a little problem in shipping over here, but I can't wait to show it. But this is from Cal. Hey, Rob, back in 2016 when Star Trek Beyond was released, Chris Pine famously said in an interview that you can't make a cerebral Star Trek in 2016. It just wouldn't work in today's marketplace. You can hide things in there, but you have to hide it under the guise of wham bam explosions and planets blowing up. That statement, in essence, reflects the storytelling approach Star Trek has taken since the debut of J.J. Abrams' 2009 movie. Pre-2009 Star Trek has always been cerebral. The Cage was famously rejected as a pilot because it was too cerebral. In many episodes of the original series, The Next Generation, DS9, Voyager, and even Enterprise, the viewers are presented with stories that addressed philosophical and existential issues. Balance of Terror subtly explores themes of prejudice and intolerance. The Best of Both Worlds is a terrifying exploration of identity. Measure of a Man is a beautiful examination of what it means to be human. And In the Pale Moonlight shows what lengths a man might be willing to go to try and do the right thing. In all these episodes, the action, if any, is often little more than a vehicle to explore social issues. Does this kind of storytelling still appeal to the current cinema-going or television audiences? I believe it still does. Otherwise, how would you explain the commercial success of intelligent science fiction movies like Interstellar, Arrival, The Martian, Inception, and Gravity, to name a few? Or TV shows like Ron Moore's Battlestar Galactica, The Expanse, and Black Mirror. It all boils down to what you've always espoused. People want a good story well told. It's all about the execution above all else. It needs to have the right balance of story, character, action, and cerebral thoughtfulness. The films I listed above are great examples of filmmakers finding the right balance. To assume that modern cinema goers would not appreciate intelligent and thoughtful storylines in a Star Trek film or a TV show undermines not only audiences and fans of the series, but the whole Star Trek legacy itself. Another factor of pre-2009 Star Trek's intelligent appeal is the fact that it is also more faithful to science than any other science fiction series of its time. Scientists and engineers as depicted as positive role models, and its viewers are attracted with its concept of advanced science and engineering. We read a lot about people from various fields of science crediting Star Trek for putting them on the career path. Some of them have even turned the ideas presented in the show to reality, so now we all practically carry all-in-one communicator pad tricorders in our pockets. We have advanced supercomputers. Heck, we even have transparent aluminum. The reason for this is because Star Trek had always engaged science advisors to assist in the technical aspects of the show. Andre Bormanis served as science advisor during the Berman era, and even Isaac Asimov advised on Star Trek the Motion Picture. Sure, the Berman era famously had a lot of technobabble to try and explain the science, but most of the time they were well done, and viewers like myself had little problem accepting the explanations thrown at us. A lot of the time, I would wonder if there are even qualified science advisors engaged for post-2009 Star Trek at all, with its transwarp interstellar beaming, spore drives, time-traveling suits powered by time crystals, and technobabble. Oh my goodness. An example, in the latest season of Discovery, we found out that a probe modified by a then unknown antagonist 900 years from the future used multiple SQL injections. I find it hard to believe 200 plus years in the future, Starfleet is still running a standard query language database in its computers. I would even be more surprised if an advanced intelligence from 900 years in the future is using SQL. Which brings me to the Picard show. A lot of the best TNG episodes revolve around philosophical and existential questions involving Picard and Data, so I would be extremely disappointed if the show follows the wham bam explosions and planets blowing up methodology that has plagued Star Trek since the 2009 reboot. I would be equally disappointed if it was laced with the same CW-style tear-filled relationship melodrama that Star Trek Discovery had plenty of. And bear in mind the decision to bring back Data and Seven of Nine, two of the most technocentric characters in Star Trek lore, would have to be substantiated with believable technobabble in their dialogue. Otherwise, their characterizations would, in my opinion, be severely affected and thus destroying verisimilitude. I swear, if I hear any one of them say, "I like science," or "This is the power of math," people, I'll tune out immediately. So contrary to Chris Pine's statement, Star Trek isn't just an action-adventure series with a lot of explosions. If it's a good story that is well told and finds the right balance between intelligent storytelling and action, I'm sure it would appeal to modern audiences. After all, Star Trek at its best has always had an active, inquiring mind and a passionate heart, with action and adventure going hand in hand. Let's hope we get a return to that kind of Star Trek with the Picard show. Sincerely yours, Cal, a.k.a. Swack Props. Well, Cal, another letter that I think knocks it right out of the park. I absolutely agree with you 100%. I honestly, in my opinion, I don't think many of the writers today working on the new Star Trek, Kirsten Beyer and Michael Chabon are perhaps exceptions. Kirsten Beyer has written a number of great Star Trek novels, Voyager novels. I mean, if you were never sold on Voyager, Kirsten Beyer's Star Trek novels are pretty great. Her Voyager novels are pretty great, and you'll, I think, develop a newfound appreciation. But I think you're right. I don't think that the problem is science fiction on film, science fiction in our media has been also very closely intertwined with action adventure. The Terminator movies, while dealing with maniacal computer systems and Skynet and time travel, really are slam bang action adventures. You know, you've got your characters running from evil Terminators. There's a lot of fights, a lot of explosions, a lot of future war. It's seldom that we see something at the box office like Denis Villeneuve's Arrival, which I really, really loved. They changed the ending from the original script. I understand why they did it. I still love Arrival a great deal. It's a movie that's emotional at its core. And I think, you know, the current stewards of Star Trek have underestimated how far the philosophy can go. It's been very, very superficial. I think Star Trek '09 was incredibly superficial, and it even painted our main characters. What I would like to have seen more is a parallel between Spock and Kirk, and watching their friendship develop, because they each, being so very different, recognize something in the other that's to be admired. I thought that there was a fundamental lack of understanding of the entire character of Spock as portrayed by Zachary Quinto. I mean, Zachary Quinto was either completely overly emotional or he was monotone. I mean, we didn't see the whole thing about Vulcans is Vulcans they have emotion. They just control it. And it's a very different thing when you realize that. And the problem is Spock, being of two worlds, he has to overcompensate because he has to be the uber Vulcan, because he's been the prejudice he had to face, the illogical prejudice. I mean, that's another thing about Vulcan civilization, is that the prejudice that Spock was made to feel growing up, even from his own father, the fact that he went to Starfleet instead of being in the Vulcan Science Academy, which in Star Trek '09 was shown as pretty much being an emotional outburst. When really I would like to think that Spock's, in my mind, I've always thought that Spock's decision to go to Starfleet was not just simply based on wanting to be obstinate towards his father, but he realized that there's more out in the universe that he wanted to experience. That Spock, the fact that he had become uber Vulcan and could control his emotions, did not temper the fact that Spock had insatiable curiosity. And that's why when he's talking about V'ger in Star Trek The Motion Picture, which, by the way, is coming back to theaters, Fathom Events is going to be releasing Star Trek The Motion Picture to theaters, which is very exciting for its 40th anniversary, I think in September. But when Spock talks about V'ger having insatiable curiosity, he might as well have been talking about himself. And that's one of the things I think that Star Trek has always done best. And Star Trek, I think, has been very, very much dumbed down. That's what I hate most about it. I think because it's become so rudimentary and so dumbed down. And look, Star Trek 2, which is everyone's favorite Star Trek movie, has a lot of action adventure in it, but it also has moments where Kirk and McCoy are contemplating Kirk's position in the universe. And that's one of my favorite scenes in any Star Trek, is when McCoy brings the glasses to Kirk on his birthday and they share the Romulan ale. And they would never have that scene in a movie today. It would be the first thing that's cut out. I mean, you do have a scene where Kirk and Pike share a nice conversation, which is my favorite scene in Star Trek '09, but only after Kirk is involved in a brawl. But I think you're right. I think it's unfortunate that the current stewards of Star Trek, what do they talk about? What do they promote at the San Diego Comic-Con? The Star Trek universe. The Burnett axiom, never put your universe before your characters or your story, has gone out the window. And, we'll see. We'll see what happens. But I hope they bring back. I mean, we live in a world now where I was just talking earlier about the great hack. Why aren't we doing stories about that? Why is Star Trek doing stories about evil AI? I mean, basically about Skynet or the beginnings of the Borg or all those things. And they're laying into it with the Picard series. Why not we discuss things like, maybe the origins of the Borg were that a society very much like ours embraced body modification through technology, and it went horribly awry. And so in order to expand lives, expand knowledge, only with the best intents were the Borg created, and make it allegorical to our way of life, and show where we're going. I mean, if you look at what happened in the show Years and Years that my moderator Terry talks about, there is an element of improving your body through technology that does in fact go horribly awry. Well, and that did a better job in just a couple of scenes than I'll bet what they're doing with the Borg in all of Picard. But again, I don't want to slag off on Picard. I'm excited to see it. But I think you're right. I mean, great science fiction the best science fiction is always a heady brew a mix of philosophical ideas and adventurous storytelling. And it's both together. And I think that's when Star Trek is at its finest. And I hope we do see a lot more of that coming. But I don't disagree with you. So we shall see. I have another letter. This is an interesting letter. This is one that Neil B. Neil, I would assume Neil B., the creator of the Space Rob video game that we're soon going to see. Neil has a quick one. Hola, Rob. I went to the movies yesterday to check out the film Yesterday. It's about a guy who wakes up in a world where the Beatles don't exist, except he is the only one who has knowledge about them. There are consequences of the band not existing anymore. For example, there is only Pepsi and no more Coke. What do you think the world would be like if Star Trek never existed? If you were the only one with knowledge, would you try and make the show? Well, a good question. I mean, I think that if Star Trek did not exist, that there would have been a Star Trek-esque show to take its place. Because in the 1960s, remember, Star Trek predates sort of the Summer of Love. I mean, it had already come on, the 66, 67 season, led right into the Summer of Love. But while Star Trek was begun at sort of a turning point, you had the Greatest Generation, the rise of the middle class, but we were in the 60s, there was definitely a turning point going from that middle class to societal strife. You had civil rights leading into Vietnam, which obviously led into the women's movement. All of those things were happening. Society was changing rapidly. But I think that somebody who believed in the John F. Kennedy Camelot world, we will go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. I think somebody would have come up with a science fiction show like Star Trek. It might not have been the same as Star Trek, but it would have, I think, been along those lines. I don't know what that would have been, but I think it definitely would have come about. If I was in a situation where I knew Star Trek existed, and yet I lived in a world where somehow it was eradicated from existence, I would not make the show. I would try and make something else that's similar. Maybe I would adapt a book series the way they did with The Expanse, or I would look into doing something similar, because I think the message of Star Trek is definitely one that humanity can get our act together and collectively move out into the cosmos and get over our petty differences and work with other alien races and things like that. That's a fascinating, compelling way to go. What bums me out about Star Trek nowadays is because there's very little allegorical component in Star Trek. People can find it, but it's really not as inherent in the stories as it used to be. I think what's really disappointing about modern Star Trek is, especially Discovery, is the stories are not reflecting where we could be going, knowing where our science is today. Where are the ethical considerations about technology? Why are we not examining where we're going as a species? And why are we watching, I would call it, very reductive storytelling that is steeped in, especially with the whole Control Section 31 arc. It's like, what is this, 1984? And I don't mean that like in a George Orwell way. I mean that in a Terminator way. I mean, they're basically showing us science fiction we saw 35 years ago, as opposed to, say, the movie Her, where we talk about operating systems that become sentient. Her, I think, is a much better example. I would much rather have seen something that went in the direction of Her. If you haven't seen Her, Spike Jonze's movie Her, it's one of the finest science fiction films of the last 20 years. And make no mistake, it's a science fiction movie. You should check it out. But I would have done something different. And I don't know what that thing is, Neil, but I would have definitely done something different. But you never know. You know, you just never know what that different thing could be. But I wouldn't have tried to recreate Star Trek. I wouldn't have. S-Beam is here. S-Beam says, just wanted to say thank you. In my opinion, you and John are way better than the mainstream movie vloggers on YouTube. I watch you guys every day. What is your anticipation level for the rise of Skywalker? Well, S-Beam, I have to tell you, since I was 10 years old, Star Wars has always been something I love. I've loved reading Star Wars novels, building Star Wars models. I mean, hell, Darth Maul and a Sith speeder. Come on, right. You see it right there. I mean, I love Star Wars. I have loved Star Wars since it came out. I see it as something different than Star Trek, but it's existed to me, coexisted with Star Wars. Star Wars and Star Trek coexist in my mind fine. I have no problem with either one. I like them all. I've built just as many Star Wars spaceship models as Star Trek spaceship models, probably. But I find myself not that interested in Rise of Skywalker because I don't think that there's a story that is being told. Watching what happens between Rey and Kylo Ren, I'm sure it'll be fine. But I really, for the first time, I have no anticipation for the Rise of Skywalker. And I think that is unfortunate. They have not told a story in this trilogy that is moving to a place that I find I'm not anticipating where they're going. You know, part of the great thing about when you're watching a film series is you can't wait to see what happens in the next part. They haven't set up anything. The conflict between Kylo Ren and Rey is not nearly as interesting to me as the conflict between Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader as they set it up in both Empire Strikes Back and leading up to Jedi. The confrontation between the Emperor, Vader, and Luke is, even though I don't like Return of the Jedi that much, it is a highlight of the Star Wars series. And I think a lot of what people love about Star Wars comes down to that battle between the Emperor, Vader, and Luke at the end of Jedi. I think that's peak Star Wars. And I just, don't care about any of the new characters that much because none of them have any storylines. The plot with Rey's story, she's almost like we're supposed to watch this new trilogy through her, but I'm not that interested because I don't know what Rey wants. I don't know where she's going. She's kind of been just kind of tossed around in a sea of plot, and she herself is not a character with much agency. So my anticipation for Rise of Skywalker, I want to see it, but this new trilogy has not engaged me the way that the other, and it's not because I didn't like what happened with Luke. As I've said before, they needed to tell a story where all of our favorite original trilogy characters were together on an adventure or a mission. We never got that. We never got Han, Luke, Leia, Chewie, R2, 3PO, Lando. We never got them all together doing something together, which I think we desperately needed. I understand why they did that, because Disney wanted to have new characters, but they needed to have one last adventure where we saw all of our favorite characters that we've grown up with. Why employ all of these actors? Why bring back all of the original trilogy actors and not put them together? I thought that was a huge, people talk about The Last Jedi. Oh, it did the way I hated it, or this, that, and the other thing. To me, the biggest mistake of this trilogy was to not put our original characters together, give them one big last hurrah, and build up these secondary characters around whatever happened, whatever the fates, the way Han Solo was done dirty, Luke kind of was done dirty, Leia was, well, we're not going to know. She's still alive. We don't know how she was done dirty by life. But unfortunately, we never got to see the characters together. And I think that was a big mistake. R2 had a tarp thrown over him, and he literally was standing over in a corner somewhere. Really bad. That was a really terrible corporate mandated miscalculation. And I think they should have given us The Force Awakens should have been it was a metaphor for Star Wars itself reawakens by putting a bow on these original trilogy characters after 30 plus years. That's what I wanted to see. Willow Yang says, I'm so disappointed with the Next Generation episode Haven. That's not a great first season episode, but no naked wedding. I feel cheated. Well, Willow, I did too. I know that deep down, even though you are a PhD student and you find your days steeped in molecular biology and bacteria, I also know that you aren't one. You fantasize a great deal about things in the naked people. Let's just say that. And I too I was cheated that we never got to see the naked wedding in Haven. Although, you know what? It never gets talked about. Haven doesn't get talked about at all, but I have to say, I will go on record, and I think that Haven is a very respectable episode of Next Generation. As far as the first season goes, it might not be great, but I don't think it's bad. And it just is dealing with a lot of topics that a lot of people don't dig. But I liked it. I liked Haven. Brandon Valenzuela says, if you liked Her, you'll love Under the Skin. Well, what Brandon is talking about, there is a science fiction film that is based on the novel by Michael Faber, who also wrote a book called The Crimson Petal and the White. Michael Faber is a great novelist. If you haven't read his books, check it out. But Under the Skin is a science fiction movie, full-on science fiction movie that stars Scarlett Johansson. And yes, I will tell you, Scarlett Johansson does appear in the film nude, if that's what you're into. And how could you not be? But I loved Under the Skin. Under the Skin is a great science fiction film. It's pure cinema. You have to be patient with it, and there's not a lot of I would say overt plot, but it's a stunning film. Again, as a matter of fact, if you want to go for a Scarlett Johansson sci-fi double feature, Her and Under the Skin are a good way to go. I adore Under the Skin. I think it's great. Timula the Spider Monkey, one of our favorite Australian fans here, members of the Post-Geek Singularity community, says, I'm at work at the moment. We'll watch when I get home. But here, have some bunts. Love your work, Rob. Well, Timula the Spider Monkey, thank you. I will take that bunts. I will use that bunts. And I will do something with it. But thank you. Thanks for I always love getting your letters. Thanks for the support of the channel. I appreciate that. That's amazing. Thank you. Here's another letter, and this letter comes from James M. So yes, it comes from James M. Dear Rob, prescript, I wrote this letter before your 181st live stream, but because the website was down, I could not send it. Before getting to the meat of by the way, I really apologize. See, this is what bums me out about having the website knocked offline even for a couple of days, because I don't know when someone's going to pick up keyboard and screen and tap out a letter. So I feel bad that you had written a letter and that you didn't know the website was down. So that bums me out. Prescript, I wrote this letter before your 181st live stream, but because the website was down, I could not send it. Before getting to the meat of my letter, I should say up front, I've never cared for Star Wars. I watched the original trilogy to see what the big deal was, wanting to like it as much as all my friends. Sadly, I could not get into it, but my brother did. So when my brother recently checked out The Force Awakens, I thought I should watch it and what the big deal was about it. And I have to say, I think it suffers from storyitis, too many stories being told at the same time. If they would have focused on only the new characters or the old, then it would have been much better. I think the movie should have started differently to set up any of the characters in the film. Without any of the characters being established, it feels like the movie never commits to the new, the old characters, preventing the story from feeling complete. If the movie had started out with a scene with Rey being told by a parent figure about the Jedi and all they did, which could explain to us why she tried to use the Force in ways that she did, it would have been a great opening. And it would have been a great recap as well by helping fill us in on where the original characters are now. The other way the movie could have opened would have been to have the training and turning of Kylo and the fallout amongst the original characters. I think The Force Awakens was the first Star Wars movie I ever watched. I would have said it was a good movie. However, it was not, and therefore not as bad as I thought it would be, but far from great. P.S. As far as The Last Jedi goes, the only thing I'll say is I don't like the character of Rose. Nothing against the actress. She could only do so much with what she was given. Her character was poorly written, and the best part of the movie for me was the one scene with Yoda. Well, James, I don't necessarily disagree with you. I was not a fan of The Force Awakens. This idea that first of all, you don't need to recap a Star Wars movie. I think with pop culture, you could have, even if you've never seen a Star Wars movie, I know there's lots of videos of people that have never seen Star Wars and they finally go watch them. But I think you would have got it if people had to get up to speed. I thought The Force Awakens was not a very great screenplay. I still don't know what the story was. You're finding out about the First Order and all of these things, but what does that have to do with Rey, really? Of course, they've sort of shoehorned this connection between Rey and Kylo Ren in, and I suppose that's fine, but I just don't really care. There's no storyline. There's nothing going on in these movies right now that compel me to watch them. I go back and watch them again. I own the 3D special Blu-ray edition of The Force Awakens. I own it. Out of obligation, I bought that big special edition 3D disc. But when I watch the film, I find myself strangely disconnected because there's really no central story being told. There's all these disparate elements happening. Han and Kylo Ren, Rey and Kylo Ren, Finn, Poe Dameron. What's the story? I mean, the story in Star Wars is Luke getting caught up with the Death Star plans, and they have to return the Death Star plans to the rebels and destroy the Death Star. That's it. Everything that's going on has a narrative thrust to it. We meet Princess Leia, R2, and 3PO. The plans are passed off to R2 and 3PO. Then R2 and 3PO find Luke. We learn about Luke. Luke has the plans. Luke meets Obi-Wan Kenobi. They all take off to Mos Eisley after Luke's aunt and uncle are killed, Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. It's very much single-minded, and you know exactly what's going on because you're following the protagonists the whole time. There is no central story being told in The Force Awakens. It's all over the place. And they're not trying to destroy Starkiller Base. That has nothing to do with the plot, really. I mean, it's where'd Luke go? Well, the characters aren't looking for him. They do kind of at the beginning, but that's kind of falls by the wayside. It's almost an afterthought that they're finding Luke. But why do they need to find Luke? We know because of the crawl, whether you like Star Wars or not, from a storytelling standpoint, the crawl at the beginning tells you everything you know into the universe. Then in the next 5 minutes after the crawl drops you into that universe and reiterates what you have read. So you don't know what the princess looks like. You don't know anything about the villains. You don't know anything about the Empire. You've just read what you've read. And in the next 5 minutes, everything you need to know about the conflict in Star Wars is graphically and beautifully set up. It's set the stage. You get the crawl, you get the next 5 minutes, and you understand where you're at. And then we move to a different storyline entirely, which is Luke Skywalker discovering the plans of the Death Star. And that was the story that's set up in the beginning. But we see the first 5 minutes on the blockade runner. It's a mini story. And then the plot that we now understand. We understand what's at stake. We don't know quite what the Death Star is. We're waiting to find out. But there is a beautiful narrative simplicity in Star Wars that I think is nowhere to be found in The Force Awakens. So anyway, yes, this is a letter. This is the last letter of the day, which I really liked. This comes from Luke Beget. And I really like this letter a lot. It asks a really interesting question, and it's something we talk about all the time. And so I will read this one next. Let's see. Oh, Joseph is here. Hello, Joseph. How are you? Good to see you all the way from lands across the Atlantic. Joseph says, I see Kathleen Kennedy as Stillwell from The Boys. I don't know about that. I'm a Kathleen Kennedy admirer and fan, but that's a nice reference. Nice reference. Emmy is here. One of my favorite letter writers. Beautiful Emmy is here. She says, I want Rise of Skywalker, but I am crossing my fingers and hoping that it doesn't hugely disappoint as Return of the Jedi did when I was 8. I thought it was too silly. Well, Emmy is absolutely correct. I was 16 when I saw Return of the Jedi. I was bummed out. I thought it was really too silly. I thought they made jokes. See, once they make jokes at the expense of characters, as opposed to joking with our characters. Like, I prefer situational humor. R2 and 3PO were always making us laugh. They were kind of this mismatched pair right out of Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress. But once we started laughing at them as opposed to laughing with them. I thought it was a mistake. And in Return of the Jedi, we graphically see this as when they fall off the skiff in Jedi, and they both have to be rescued. They're both face down in the sand right after Jabba's sail barge explodes, or right before it explodes. Right after. It really bothered me. I thought seeing R2 and 3PO face down in the sand right then and there when I was watching Jedi, I was like, how could they do that? How do you make fun of your characters in that way? If you look at Willow Yang, obviously reviewed Trouble with Tribbles, but the two great humorous episodes of the original series of Star Trek, one was Trouble with Tribbles. The other was A Piece of the Action. And all of the humor in A Piece of the Action is derived from the fact that our characters are dropped into an absurd situation. A whole society that has modeled itself after Chicago mobs of the 20s. Absurd, absolutely absurd, ridiculous situation. But they have to make do. And one of my favorite humorous scenes in Star Trek was when Kirk is trying to drive a car with a manual transmission, and it's lurching forward and backwards, and he's just a terrible driver. And Spock turns to him and says, "You're an excellent starship commander. But as I think he says, as a taxi driver, you leave much to be desired." And it's funny. It's actually almost a one-liner. It's very funny, but it's true, and it's based on the absurd situation that they're in. Spock is commenting on something that we as viewers can recognize. How the hell is Kirk supposed to drive this car? But he's trying. He's not doing a very good job of it. But we laugh with the characters, not at the characters. And Star Trek humor at its finest, we're always laughing with the characters or with the situation. Like in Trouble with Tribbles, when in Trouble with Tribbles, when Kirk says, "I take this very seriously. It is you I do not take seriously." It's very funny. I love those things. Star Trek 3, when Sulu says, "The word, sir," and Kirk says, "The word is no. I am therefore going anyway." I mean, that's the best kind of humor, the best kind of Star Trek humor. And I think Return of the Jedi is very, very silly. I mean, when Han Solo is hanging, the Ewoks are setting the fire, and he's trying to blow the fire out. I'm just like, yeah, it was silly. So yes, I agree with you. I felt the same way because Empire Strikes Back was not silly. And I'm not saying that I wanted necessarily something as dark as that, but the stakes were dire. And the rebellion was at stake. And it was a film that the rebels were either going to win or lose and be eliminated from the universe. And I agree with you 100%. And it was silly, and I didn't understand why it had to be that way. I understood George Lucas was taking back his franchise he felt that Irvin Kershner had run away with in Empire. If you read Rinsler's book on the making of Empire Strikes Back, you find out how much George Lucas really didn't like Empire. And to this day, I think it annoys him that people say it's the best Star Wars movie. That's just an opinion. I don't know if that's true. Now, on to Luke Beckett's letter. "Hi, Rob. Nice to see your website back up. Let me ask you a question. What's the deal with canon? Why does it matter so much? And who decides what is canon anyways? Are there committees? Is there a vote? Does somebody simply decide and everybody agrees? It seems to me that anytime somebody adds something to a story, they add it to the canon, and then it's canon. Superman was vulnerable to nothing until somebody came up with kryptonite. Then it was canon that Superman was vulnerable to kryptonite. Pretty simple. But people don't think of it that way. People like to be selective. I know that some people believe Star Trek ended with the original series. The movies and all the following series to them are not canon. Star Trek the Motion Picture has difficulty being canon for a lot of people since Wrath of Khan basically rebooted the series and the events of the motion picture were never referenced again. So is it canon? Is the Star Trek animated series canon? Some people say yes, some people say no. Who is right? In Star Trek V, Spock suddenly had a half-brother we had never heard about before. Is he canon? In Discovery, Spock has an adoptive sister we never heard from before. Some people say that she is not canon. Why? Because they don't like it? Because you can't add something to canon after 50 years? The idea of canon seems to be very arbitrary to me. Doesn't canon just tie your hands together anyway? Doesn't it keep creators from being creative with the property they are working on? Must be very difficult to write a TV show or movie when each time you want to try something new, you have to check 50 years of history to make sure episode 3 from season 2 of some past series doesn't say you can't. Don't you think sometimes the canon gets too full and needs to be emptied? This has happened before. The DC Universe did this a couple of times, most famously with Crisis on Infinite Earths. Star Trek did this with Star Trek 09. They created a new timeline where they were free of canon and could develop their own stories free from anything that happened before. Discovery just did the same thing by sending their crew 1,000 years into the future. Why is that wrong? Now can we get fresh new stories? They could have done that from day one. But in the end, what does it matter? If you're watching Into the Forest I Go from Discovery, do you have to know how it relates to the Cloud Minders from 1969 for you to enjoy it? Can it not stand on its own? So now you're worried about how canonical Picard is going to be. Again, can't that show stand on its own? Will it help the show if Picard sits down with Data and starts talking about the time Data played Scrooge on the holodeck? I'm not sure. As I recall, the original series was episodic. Nobody worried from week to week what the previous episode had to do with the next one. Nobody cared about canon either. So why is it so important? Luke B. Luke, fantastic letter. You are delving into a question that I think we as fans will be arguing about until our sun goes supernova, assuming we're still here. I can tell you, all I can answer for you is why I like canon, why I enjoy it, and why canonical things add to my enjoyment of fictitious universes. And that is because I like to believe in the fictitious universes that I'm following. Let's see, the things that I've always loved that I think have canon is important to them. Tolkien, Middle-earth, such great canon. Star Trek, of course. Star Wars, The X-Files, now The Expanse. And I think, and certainly I'm a huge DC and Marvel Comics fan, so X-Men canon, Teen Titans canon, Justice League canon. I think we live in a continuum, and I think human beings like to structure our worlds. We think about what happens, what's happened in our own pasts, and what happens or what will happen in our own future. And in a way, we all think about our own lives in sort of a canonical way. We think about friends we've had or still have. We think about events from our childhoods. We think about ex-lovers that we miss, or we think about lovers we never had. We think about deaths in our family. We think about jobs and school and things in our own lives. We contextualize our own lives by looking at our past, present, and future. Our own canon, if you will. Now, we know that through our lives, there are things that actually happen to us. Like if you had the first girl you ever kissed or the first boy you ever kissed, they're going to be the first boy or girl you ever kissed. And whether that kiss was a good kiss or whether it was a bad kiss, that becomes canonical in your life. And that event, if you can think back to it and go, the first person I ever kissed was such and such, and it made me feel this way. And it had a lot to do with how I felt about relationships with not same sex, but with the opposite sex or the same sex, depending on who you kiss first and what your predilections are. Your own life is canonical. You have a history. And so I think human beings are already hardwired to enjoy, because we don't just have our own history. We like hearing about other people's histories. I mean, you know, when you meet somebody, your significant other, you often talk about your past, like what happened in your past. Like my girlfriend now, Elizabeth, she was married for a long time. I was married. We both have the experiences of being married. Our experiences were different, but we can both talk to each other about our experiences with significant others. And those are our canonical histories. They happened. And so I think that when you're immersed in what are stories if nothing else but then trying to contextualize the human experience. Now, I know I'm going in a roundabout way to discuss canonical history, but there is something that happened in Star Trek that I don't think can be, at least how I became a fan, and I guess I would call myself a continuity pornographer. I'm a canonista because I like to believe that there is clearly, when you're watching Star Trek as a kid, stuff would happen when you're watching the show, like another Constitution class starship. Like suddenly they would find the Defiant in the Tholian web, and the Defiant disappeared into the spatial rift. Or you would hear that in the Immunity Syndrome, even though you never saw it, that there was a heavy cruiser, a Constitution class heavy cruiser like the Enterprise, called the Intrepid, that was completely crewed by Vulcans. So that ship exists outside of the crew of the Enterprise. Of course, we met Bob Wesley, and in the Ultimate Computer, we saw 4 other heavy cruiser class starships like the Lexington. That's now part of the Star Trek universe. So suddenly, in your mind, you're like, oh, on this star date, these 4 starships took on the M5 computer that was designed and created by Dr. Richard Daystrom. So there's all of these things that are happening in the Star Trek universe. And if you're a Star Trek fan, these are all facts. These things happened. We watched them happen. So, and the greatest example of Star Trek canon, I think, ever is the Menagerie. The Menagerie parts 1 and 2, which of course the only 2-part episode in Star Trek history. And in the Menagerie, they brilliantly used the original unaired Star Trek pilot, The Cage, and they showed us events from a little more than a decade prior, when the Enterprise had a different captain. Spock was the science officer. We met, of course, Pike for the first time, and we got to see they incorporated The Cage into Star Trek history. And suddenly we saw what the Enterprise looked like 10 years before the original series began. We saw new uniforms, different uniforms, earlier uniforms. We saw people that we'll never see again, but we knew they served on the Enterprise. So suddenly, part of your enjoyment of the Star Trek universe, at least for me, was that the Star Trek universe was going on. There was all these things happening outside of our cast of Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Sulu, Uhura, Chekhov. There was a whole universe out there happening concurrently with ours. And in my mind, I know when I was a kid, that made me really, really interested. I'm like, wow, that happened. It's like when your friend calls you up and says, I was at this party this weekend, and guess what happened to so-and-so? I mean, that becomes a canonical part of your life, even though it's only peripherally part of your life because you're hearing it from secondhand. You weren't there. But we know as human beings that our lives are going on anyway. And so the Star Trek universe, as far as TV goes, gave us this history that was happening within the context of Star Trek. And if you're a fan of the show, as I was, and you watch it over and over and over and over again, there were details in it, like the United Earth Space Probe Agency was mentioned in Star Trek. And then we find out there's the United Federation of Planets. So as a viewer, I'm asking myself as a kid, I'm like, when did the United Earth Space Probe Agency start? And how does it relate to Starfleet and the Federation? How did all of that work? And so I think the experience of watching Star Trek became richer for me as a kid by having this rich backstory. And we had the animated series. Now, I think there was a certain prejudice to the animated series because it was on Saturday mornings. But in my mind, I knew Gene Roddenberry created it. I knew that all of the original cast members, with the exception of Walter Koenig, who was not in the show but wrote an episode, The Infinite Vulcan, I didn't mind. I looked upon the animated Star Trek as canonical because it was made by the same people. Even people like Margaret Arman, who wrote an original series episode, would come back and wrote episodes for the show. David Gerrold, certainly. So in my mind, the animated series was canonical because it was the only new Star Trek that we were getting, and I liked the stories. Sure, they're simplistic and they were made for Saturday morning television, but they were interesting stories, and I felt that they were canonical. Gene Roddenberry himself once said that they were not canonical when the idea of canon came up. Then, in my mind, when Star Trek the Motion Picture opened, that was the pinnacle. That was peak Star Trek canon, because it took place, whether it took place 5 years later or 10 years later, within the movie, you knew that Kirk was chief of Starfleet operations for 2.5 years. You didn't know like how long exactly, what time frame, but you knew that in real life in 1979, Star Trek the Motion Picture happened 10 years after the original series. Now, whether you believe that there was another 5-year mission on the refit Enterprise before Star Trek II, all of those things, we don't know for a fact, because then there was this idea that the only things that are canonical are what appear on screen. But that doesn't make any sense, because so much of we know, and when they say it's on screen, we heard mention of the Intrepid. We never saw the Intrepid, but there was mention of it in Immunity Syndrome. So we know that there was a starship of all Vulcans. But what's interesting to me is when I love Star Trek and dream of Star Trek and think about Star Trek, I love to think about the Star Trek universe as a whole. And I think that becomes part of the great appeal of these franchises, whether it's Lord of the Rings, and you can read appendices, you can read whole books like the Silmarillion, which is basically canonical backstory to Middle-earth. And when you read all this, it just feels more real. And I think that's what we love. We love the more real and the more detailed these fictional universes are, the more fun they are to watch, the more fun they are to chart, the more fun they are, because that means it's more immersive. You know, and as a kid growing up, getting the Star Trek concordance and seeing the connections between episodes, reading the glossary of terms, getting the Star Trek spaceflight chronology that came out in the wake of Star Trek the Motion Picture, when, yeah, it was all made up, as everything is. It was that canon was disproved later, but getting all that backstory and reading what it was, that just makes it all more real and fun to me. I think you're right. As I learned from interviewing the writers themselves for the Star Trek The Next Generation documentaries, canon becomes a giant rock hanging around your neck. Canonical history, the canonical past of things like Star Wars and Star Trek become a huge problem for people trying to do new programming. However, if you're making a show like Star Trek Discovery, where part of what you're doing is you're setting it in a time frame that is canonical, that we've already seen, for fans, for previous fans, why are you doing that? The very act of setting your show in a certain Star Trek time frame locks you into canonical Star Trek that we've already seen. And it is incredibly annoying for me as a fan to watch. Why don't starships, Federation starships, have round warp nacelles? We've never seen a warp nacelle that wasn't round from that time frame. You know, we have 79 episodes of the original Star Trek. We've seen other starships before. We've had 40 or 50 years of previous history. So everything they're doing on Star Trek Discovery, everything about it flies in the face of canonical Star Trek. Now, in my mind as a fan, I ask myself all the time, why would you do that? I understand we're trying to build new fans, but you're setting your show in a canonical period of Star Trek that all you can do is violate canon with everything you've done. Even if you want to do a visual reboot, it doesn't make sense at all, not in the least. And you're choosing to work in the Star Trek franchise, which has a rich canonical history. And I think it's strange and dumb. But yes, it's immediately limiting to the writers. And I think that they've alienated some of the fan base. Also, mostly because I think most of the people are alienated from Star Trek Discovery because of the stories and the characters more than anything else. Because again, if the stories and characters were great, if they were at least up to snuff like other science fiction shows that are currently on TV, I don't think there would be much of a problem. People will forgive canonical mistakes if you're telling great stories about characters that you love. But anyway, as Emmy, who is here, the lovely Emmy, by the way, if you see her profile photos on Facebook, but if you are as she said, she loves Star Trek Discovery. I don't think when Emmy is watching the Discovery, she's not thinking about Star Trek canon, say, the way I would be. So there are people that are not canonistas that can watch Star Trek Discovery and enjoy it for its own sake. But so much of my fandom has been wrapped up in canonical Star Trek. Now, who decides canon? Well, only the viewer. You know, they're canonical, whatever's canon. Like, I read a lot of Star Trek novels. A lot of the Star Trek novels that I've read, I really love. And in my mind, they take interesting Star Trek concepts. Like, I love the idea that Peter David put forth in his novel Vendetta, that the Doomsday Machine from the second season original series episode was originally built to fight Borg cubes. That's why it was built. And we never know where the Doomsday Machine came from. But I love the idea. I love that Peter David went in and made certain suppositions and said, okay, whatever race was fighting the Borg or whatever, they built the Doomsday Machine in order to defeat a Borg cube. I'm like, that makes sense. So that doesn't ever appear in canonical Star Trek. But in my mind, when I read his book Vendetta, I'm like, I'm going to incorporate that into my headcanon. I think that's true. Now, we'll never know. You know, we don't. But in my mind, I'm like, okay, I'll buy that. Now, I think that a lot of people say, well, that's not canonical. I think what's happening in a lot of these things, and Star Wars is the same way as Star Trek. Star Wars has been developing its canon over the course of 40 plus years. And now since Disney bought the whole thing, they're trying to have a story group. They're creating a new canon and they had to, because post Return of the Jedi Star Wars lore was covered so well in the novels, and a lot of it's sort of inconsistent, but we knew the story of what happened with Solo and Leia and Luke and all those Mara Jade and all the characters that were created. They had to just jettison that, which is weird. You know, it's pretty interesting, but when you want to start from scratch, they had to do that. They could not do what they wanted to do with the Star Wars film series. This idea, it's very interesting. The idea that books and comics and animated shows or whatever weren't necessarily canon, even though you'd been thinking about them, and especially big fans have been thinking about canonical Star Wars for a long time. We were just told that, nope, none of this is real anymore. We're starting from scratch, which is kind of strange. But in the long run, did it really matter? I mean, Force Awakens made $2 billion, so that's okay. But X-Files. I was a huge X-Files fan. And X-Files, their mythology episodes, I was trying to make sense as a canonista. I'm like, oh, the Monster of the Week or the mythology episodes. I was following them, and I was loving the mythology they were building until I got to the movie, the first X-Files movie, when they just jettisoned it all. Anything that was interesting, they just made it lame. So I really didn't like that first X-Files movie at all. It didn't make any sense. I mean, I can't get into it, but they didn't understand. They were trying to build a canonical, cohesive universe in the X-Files, and they just, because they didn't know what it was in the first place, and they were making it up as they went along. Same with Lost. You know, you're watching Lost, you're trying to, where's this going? And then you realize the writers don't know. So they're making it up as they go. You're trying to make sense of canonical history. Look, I'm a firm believer that our fictional universes are fictional. The universes that are created in science fiction, fantasy, and horror, part of their appeal is their canonical structure. We didn't see much of Game of Thrones history, but we certainly heard a lot about it. And you could piece together what happened. It becomes a big part of the show. And the reason we love these programs so much is because of this canonical history that the shows give us. I can't say, I mean, I do have to go back and say, well, if you didn't hear about it on the show or you didn't see it on the show, it's not canonical. That seems to me to be a pretty good way to look at things. But you know what? The authors, I think, always do better if they have some kind of canonical fealty to what came before, at least in my mind. Does it become a pain in the ass? Yes. But look, if you're setting a story in the post World War II, World War II happened and it unfolded in a certain way. Certain things happened. And you can't get away from that. You can't get away from history. I think a fictional universe is the same way. Like the Star Trek universe, there is I've never thought of, like, they want to change Star Trek Star Trek is, to my mind, an alternative future that is based on where we were at in the 60s. Now, there is a school of thought that says, well, there was no eugenics wars in the late 60s. So, like in Greg Cox's books, the eugenics wars were fought in secret. I've never subscribed to that at all. I'm like, Star Trek is a alternate history. It is a period piece about a future that was put forth in the 60s. So even though it's 300 years or 400 years in the future, that future reflects what went on in the 60s when it was created. Now, they did a pretty good job of that up through the end of Enterprise. But now what's really interesting to me is if you were to take our technology today as a baseline and extrapolate that into the Star Trek future would look far different after what we know about technology, especially computing technology and biotechnology. Our Star Trek future 300 years from now would look very, very different. So it's weird. I've always thought unless you look at Star Trek as an alternate history that is based in the time in which it was created in the 60s, and you need to extrapolate forward based on the 1960s, you're never going to get Star Trek quite right, because that's what Star Trek is. If you're going to extrapolate and do what they did with technology, our Star Trek future would look very different. That's why when I was talking about what I do with the Star Trek series, I would reboot the whole thing. I would have started from scratch. Star Trek 09, you've still got the concepts, you've still got Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, you've got all those core basic ideas, but start over from scratch. You know, you've got the basic concept, but that way you would never be locked in. So you do like a Battlestar Galactica reboot, brilliant reboot. They take all the core elements, you take the iconography of the Battlestar itself. Does the Battlestar Galactica look different in 2004 in Ron Moore's reboot? Yes. But it's still, if you put it side by side next to the Battlestar Galactica from the 78 version, you could be like, oh, that still looks like a Battlestar. We've still got our core characters. We've still got the Cylons. We've still got the basic tenet of the war between the tenets of the war between the Cylons and the humans. We've got the 13 or the 12 colonies. You know, we've got all that stuff, but they rebooted Battlestar Galactica in grand fashion. Now, because Star Trek was so steeped in canon, and because Star Trek had always been moving forward or pushing the universe forward or going back with Enterprise, they had been trying to build a canon for 40 years. I think when they did Star Trek 09, they should have started from scratch. And you just come right out and reboot the whole thing. You've still got all the iconography. You just start telling a different story, and telling a different story from the first time that Kirk and Spock met. You could go anywhere. You know, you just say this is a reboot. And Battlestar Galactica was a perfect example of how to show the way. You know, and you start building your own canon from scratch. Now, you could say certain events, such as Khan Noonien Singh being aboard the Botany Bay, you could still say that it was informed by all of that, but you can put your own spin on it. But they didn't. They even locked it in to canon by having the Kelvinverse be created. And it really is up to the viewer. But I think the greatest enjoyment of our fictional universes comes from these fictional universes having a canon, having a history. If you're going to delve into the history, it gives the whole universe more verisimilitude. You get to utilize that history and extrapolate where you're going. And I think that that's an interesting way to go. And I think the most successful of these universes, I mean, think about all the universes we have. The MCU, it has an internal canonical chronology that we've now followed through the movies. Is it the same as the comics? No, but we understand it's the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's not supposed to be like the comic universe, but it does have its own internal canon, and they've done a great job keeping that internal canon in place. And they keep adding to it while informally, I don't even know what I was saying, but it has its own internal consistencies. The MCU does. And everyone knows it's the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Hey, Gilbert, it's not any other universe. Please, why are you barking, buddy? Don't bark, dude. I know someone's here. But I think that makes the MCU. Hey, guys, Tallulah, don't bark. I think that's what makes we love things because they have canon. And I think it makes everything better. And whether you like the Twilight franchise, that has canon, or whether you like Gilbert, do you want a cookie? Is that what I have to do to shut you up? All right. I guess they get cookies. That'll keep them quiet. What do you have in your mouth, Tallulah? But anyway, I do think that we love our fictional universes more if there's a canonical adherence to them. They create their own pasts and their own futures, and they stay consistent. And I think people like those things better than if they don't have them. But who decides it? That's the real question. I mean, ultimately, I guess the viewers decide. But to me, yes, is it harder to follow canon? It's totally more difficult to follow canon. Look, both of these guys and girls are here. Here you go, buddy. No, Tallulah, you already got 2. That's what you get. And Gilbert didn't get anything. It's harder to do that. It really is. But I think everyone is more rewarded when you're doing a show that has canonical fealty to itself. And I think the fact that they hired a Tolkien scholar to work on the new Lord of the Rings show, because it is about the Second Age, and they're basically going to extrapolate from what Tolkien had written. They don't have a story like the Lord of the Rings to follow, but they've got events that Tolkien detailed all throughout the Lord of the Rings, but mostly in the appendices. And they can and the Silmarillion, of course, they can really, I think, extrapolate and do something good. So, yes. A Cinefinity and Beyond says, Rob, watch The Loudest Voice yet? Crow equals an Emmy. I have not. That's about the Roger Ailes story for the rise of Fox News. I really want to watch. I love Russell Crowe. I can't wait to see it. Terry Flynn asks, my moderator Terry Flynn says, have you watched Years and Years? Have you finished it? If not, will you watch the Korean version of Designated Survivor? Netflix has brilliant output. Yes. Okay, there's some interesting things you're saying. HBO has been airing the co-production they did with the BBC of Russell Davies' new series, Years and Years. Years and Years is a 6-part limited series about the near future. It's basically about Britain of the next 15 years, and it extrapolates on current social trends, everything from politics to technology, through the lens of one British family, and it's freaking brilliant. It's so great. And the way it deals with near future technology and the rise of a politician played by Emma Thompson, and deals with Brexit and the ramifications of that to the rest of Europe. It is a brilliant, brilliant science fiction show. And make no mistake, it is science fiction. It's science fiction in the best sense. It's near future and deals with our society. And it's a fantastic show. I've only seen the first 4 episodes. I have not watched episodes 5 and 6, although the 4th episode was extraordinary. And talk about packing an emotional wallop. Don't read any spoilers about Years and Years either, because it's a very surprising show, and I loved it. Now, the Korean version of Designated Survivor. For those of you who don't know, Designated Survivor was a show that was on network television, and it ran 2 seasons, and then it was acquired by Netflix. They produced a 3rd season, and it's going to end after 3 seasons, but apparently there's going to be a Korean remake of it. Now, Designated Survivor was about a horrible terrorist attack on our capital, and everybody was killed in our government except the designated survivor, who happened to be a low-ranking housing executive, or a housing, what would you call him, the Secretary of Housing Junior. And he was the only person that survived, and Kiefer Sutherland played that character, and he was elevated to become president of the United States. The first 10 episodes of Designated Survivor were some of the greatest appointment TV ever. I called it airport or airplane television. Like, it'd be airplane reading. You'd find like a Dan Brown book at the bookstore. Like, I didn't know what the Da Vinci Code was. I just knew it was a bestseller. I bought it and read it in like one sitting. I'm like, wow, this is the greatest bad novel I've ever read. That's what I would call airplane reading. Well, the first 10 episodes of Designated Survivor were great. Then it kind of went off the rails. But they brought it back for a 3rd season on Netflix that I thought was really good. And apparently there's going to be a Korean version of it. I was sorry to see, like many Netflix shows, they they're ending them after 3 seasons, but I really like the 3rd season of Designated Survivor. It wasn't as good as those first 10 episodes, but it was pretty good, and I really enjoyed Designated Survivor. So yeah. Stubble McShave says DS9 had the best comedy episodes, especially with Ferengis. I would agree. I'd say some of the Ferengi episodes are really funny. There's a great episode called Little Green Men, where basically a Ferengi ship and our very favorite characters find themselves at Area 51 back in the 50s. And again, the humor was very situational and it was very funny. And that's one of the things I really liked about those episodes, was how funny they could be. I was a big fan of a lot of the Ferengi episodes. Some of them were a little over the top, but I quite enjoyed them. And again, Deep Space Nine, when they did humor, like Our Man Bashir and things like that, we did get some decent humorous episodes. And that's because the episodes were always done with characters in mind. They were not at the expense of our characters, but they were situational. Ferengi episodes were even situational. So yeah, I mean, I big fan of those episodes. So I mean, I love Deep Space Nine. I dearly love Deep Space Nine. Emmy says, that is correct. I adore Star Trek, but there are many aspects of it I choose to forgive, just as I do with the friends I love. Well, Emmy, that is a great example. That's great. Absolutely true. There are things in Star Trek, like I try and reconcile. Next Generation really bothered me when it first started because Next Generation said that we had a 3rd World War. Well, in my mind, the 3rd World War was the eugenics wars. That's what I thought the 3rd World War was. But the pilot episode of Next Generation, Encounter at Farpoint, went against that and said in the mid-21st century there was the post-atomic horror, and that we did have another world war, and we were able to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. But I guess it made sense. But that always bothered me. I'm like, that's not canon. But because Gene Roddenberry oversaw Next Generation, you had to go with it and go, well, yes, it is. And I understand that. I mean, I get where they were coming from. I know why they had to do that. So one of the things that I think Star Trek fans do is try and reconcile discrepancies within Star Trek. Like, how does the United Earth Space Probe Agency work with the Federation? How did all that happen? When did it happen? We didn't mention the Federation until, I believe, the 2nd season of the original series. So where did the Federation come from? Where did Starfleet come from? How does all of that work? And they did these things that were the consistency of Star Trek, as there was more and more Star Trek, became harder and harder to do. So yeah, that was rough. It's for me as a canonista, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. And it would bother me. But then again, my favorite Star Trek novelists, whether it's Diane Duane, whether it's Peter David, whether it's the Reeve Stevens, whether it's Christopher Bennett, whether it's David Mack, whether it's Dayton Ward. I mean, all of these people, all of these Star Trek novelists are like the people that make the most of canon. They reconcile everything. I mean, hell, the Star Trek novel Federation deals a lot with the character of Flint from Requiem for Methuselah. And I'm like, who other than the Reeve Stevens would do that? And they delve in, they would take these elements of canon, of Star Trek canon, and just extrapolate upon them. Vonda McIntyre did such a great job of that in her Star Trek movie novelizations. And it was so great. Like, these novelists would pay much more attention to Star Trek canon than the writers of episodes were doing, because it would take them months to write books, and they were really into it. And that's why I became a Star Trek novelist fan. I really, after Vonda McIntyre wrote the first pocket Star Trek novel, The Entropy Effect, I started reading them, and the best of the Star Trek novels always took canon into consideration and extrapolated upon canon and made it better. And I really loved that. I thought that was fantastic. I really enjoyed when that kind of stuff happens. And as Emmy points out, elements of canon that are overlooked or don't seem to be correct, you overlook that. And yeah. Dan Allen says, good win today for the family, Rob. Oh yes, the family. I guess you're referring to the Schmodown. I hope you are referring to the Schmodown. My family is the best, although I can't discuss that here. I'll have to discuss that anywhere. And people who don't know, the movie Trivia Schmodown has been something that's been going on for years. I've been participating in it in various ways. I am the commissioner until August 15th, although we will see how long my reign will last. So I'm glad that you liked the family's victory, as you should, because it is the greatest faction in the league. So, indeed, let's hear it for the family. All right, everyone. I'm going to bring this chat to a close. This has been a good chat, good letters. I'm glad the website's back up and running, and people are doing well. Dan Allen also says that he loves everything that I'm doing as the commissioner. I'm glad. Thank you very much for that, Dan. Thanks for the support of the channel. First of all, I want to thank my moderators. I want to thank Mike Bodden. I want to thank Detective Jim. I want to thank Terry from the UK and Greg for being great moderators. Thank you all. If you like these chats, please hit like. Please hit the little bell so you know when I'm going on. I want to thank all of you members of the Post-Geek Singularity. It's nice to have Vesna back all the way from Sarajevo. And she's back and participating. Good to have her back. It's good to have all of you people back. It's good that I'm back. I was gone for 2 days. I mean, we're coming to the end of the month. I can't believe I've got to do something. What should I do? For the 200th Robservations chat, it would be nice to be able to get some of you guys on. Like, I don't know if we can do a Google Hangout. We won't have anybody. If you don't want to be on, have your picture on, it'd be cool to do a Google Hangout live chat where I can get some of you members of the Post-Geek Singularity on to do this live with you guys. So all of you people who are active members, if you want, send me whether you'd be interested in participating for a 200th show where I get to have you guys live. And it'd be great to have from all over the world. But if you're interested in that, it's coming up. I mean, if I do chats every day, it's basically in 2.5 weeks, I'll hit the 200th show. And I'd really want to do a live chats with you guys. We could all do sort of a round robin discussion. It would be cool. I know a lot of you have told me you were shy and you wouldn't want to do that, but it certainly would be great to hear from some of you live. So if you're at all interested, maybe nobody is, I don't know. But if you're at all interested for the 200th, I don't know how many people you can get into a Google Hangout, and I don't want it to turn into a popularity contest. Like, oh, if I pick you, that means I'm anointing you somehow. I don't want to do that. But if you're interested in doing that, I guess I would pick to see who would be the most eclectic group of people. I don't know. But anyway, that's just something I'm thinking about. Maybe I won't do that. I don't know. Maybe if it becomes too hard to do. But I think it'd be fun. I got to do something for the 200th show because I wouldn't be here without you guys. So thank you, and thanks for all the support. I want everybody to remember that every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. I'm very excited, by the way. Tonight I'm going out with my friend Michael Davis. Michael Davis, if you don't know, directed the movie Shoot 'Em Up. He wrote and directed Shoot 'Em Up with Clive Owen. And he has been working on a film. You might ask, where has he been for the last 10 years? He has been hand animating himself he's been hand animating himself a movie about this attempted assassination of Richard Nixon. And it's crazy. And he's been working on it for years. And I'm going out with him to an event. We're going to have dinner, catch up. For those of you who don't know, if you haven't seen Shoot 'Em Up, if you have the DVD or the Blu-ray, I did produce the special features for that movie. The movie is pretty hilarious. It's aged pretty well. And I think that if you haven't seen Shoot 'Em Up and you like action films, it's very fun. So I'm going out with him. I'm looking forward to that. Well, I'm going to bring the 182nd episode of Robservations to a close. I want to remind you, this is brought to you by Lucky Tiger Men's Grooming Products for those men who want to look good and feel great. You can go to their website at getluckytiger.com and use PGS for Post-Geek Singularity Community, and you get 20% off your order. And by the way, as I said before, Zoe Trope, Elizabeth's oldest daughter, stole my all over Lucky Tiger body wash. So it's not just for men, it's for women too. So check it out. Go to their website, buy some stuff, report back because they support the Burnettwork. And that is it for today. I'm going to bring an end to this chat. I want to thank you all for being here. It wouldn't be any fun without you guys in my life. So remember, have a better day.